Hey guys, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to today's live event, The Future of Travel in a Post-COVID World. I'm Tony Argyle from Travatical. I'll be your host today. I'll just enable the chat box, guys, so we can get some feedback from those that are joining us. And if you can just jump on there and say hello to us, it'd be good to know that you can hear us okay and see us all right. And also which part of the world you're from. So if you can just jump to the chat box, it would be nice to know that you're all there. I'm going to introduce you in the meantime to our esteemed group of panelists for today's discussion. We have Barbara Weibel of, I'm having a mind blank for a minute, Barbara.
Hole in the Donut.
Thank you. Hole in the Donut Cultural Travels, holeinthedonut.com. Barbara is one of the top 50 travel bloggers in the world and has traveled to, I think, nearly 100 countries now. Is that right, Barbara?
I went to my 7th continent and my 100th country, and I've been to, I don't know, 7 or 8 non-sovereign territories as well. So sort of a major life goal for me.
Oh, well, it's certainly mounting up. I've got a long way to go to catch you. Good to have you here anyway. We also have Ian Usher here from House Sitting Magazine. Ian and his partner Vanessa are co-editors of the magazine, a free publication for house sitters, and you can find them out at House Sitting Magazine. And Ian, you're joining us from the United Kingdom. Welcome.
Good morning. Yes, it's 9 o'clock here in the UK, and we're under lockdown way down in the south of the UK in Cornwall at the moment.
Much like most of us. And we also have Duncan Dempster-Smith of To Travel To, and Duncan's one of the leading travel bloggers in Australia. Duncan and Jane have been on the road now for a number of years, and they're experts at traveling on a budget. So Duncan, welcome. Nice to have you here. Duncan's having
Thanks, guys. Good to be here. Hello to everybody.
Duncan's having a few internet problems, so you might just drop in and out, so we'll work around that anyway. But we've got a few people on board so far. Tracy from Melbourne. Hi, Tracy. We've got our friends of Jane and Duncan's, but look at Kathy Wong here from Sydney. Global Wanderers, Andrew and Christopher from Sydney. We've got Matthew from Sydney, a big Sydney presence turning up. Friend from Adelaide. We've got SG Hansey from Bangkok. Bill from Sydney. Some Gold Coasters as well. Vivi Gillard. We've got Brent from Christchurch in New Zealand. Susan and John are here. Sandy, Rob. We've got, well, there's too many people now. It's flying through. We've got Joe from Queenstown in New Zealand, Karen from Eden in Australia. So there's quite a list of people. Welcome, everybody. Good to have you here. Please use the chat box for anything rather than questions and answers, because it'll just be a lot easier for us to see the questions. If you have questions too, put 3 or 4 question marks on the end, because there's a lot flying through on the screen right now. Oh, we've got Zuza from Hungary. That's a long way away.
Hi, Zuza.
Put 3 or 4 question marks on the end, and then I'll hopefully spot the questions as we go. So we'll try and feed back and forth between a few of the topics we already have to discuss and some of the questions that we see coming through on the list as we go. So we'll also have a poll, guys. Once we've got a few of you on board, people are still coming on, we're going to throw up a little bit of a poll for you, just asking 2 or 3 questions about what your travel intentions are, how confident you're feeling about travel, and we'll put the results of those up at the end of the webinar as well for everyone to see. So it'd be good to see what your feelings are on travel too. So with no further ado, we'll get underway. Guys, I mean, 6 months ago, I don't think any of us would have expected this situation to happen. We're basically holed up where we are, in many cases not where we're intended to be. It's not where we were meant to be anyway, and I know in your case, Ian, you weren't intending to be down in Cornwall at this stage either, but we've had these circumstances thrust upon us, as tough as it is, and it's affected our lives in so many ways, obviously health-wise, certainly economically as well. But today we're going to be talking about the impact on travel, and that's why we have you guys here today, because you're experts in that field. Nobody has a crystal ball, as you've rightly said, Barbara, but we'll probably all have opinions on what we think will happen. And the purpose behind this today really is just to have a bit of a roundtable discussion, share some thoughts, and maybe expose ourselves to some ideas we hadn't thought about. So with that in mind, we'll kick off. Probably the first topic really I want to have a look at is maybe the airline industry. And perhaps, Barbara, I'll chuck this towards you. I mean, they've probably been the most immediately hit by this. We're seeing planes traveling at 5% of their capacity, most of them empty. What's going to happen with the airline industry? Are we going to see some go under? Will there be consolidations? And maybe from a pricing point of view, what do you see happening in that field?
Well, I suspect there is going to be some consolidation, and I think there will be some that won't make it at all. Some of the smaller operators, I know that Lufthansa has completely closed Germanwings, I believe, and I doubt that Flybe is going to make it. I think EasyJet will probably pull through in terms of the discount operations. And I got a really interesting email from the founders of AirAsia. I'm pretty sure it was AirAsia. And they said that they're one of the few that have not laid off any of their people. And that they are, the founders are not taking any salaries during this. All of their employees have agreed to a 15 to 75% reduction in salaries. And I mean, there's a lot of good things going on like that with respect to the smaller airlines, I think, that are trying to take care of their employees. I think that when we come out of this, I saw a video the other day with one woman on board a great big jumbo jet. And I think that there's going to have to be some pretty steep discounting to attract people back to travel, because there's a bit of fear, well, more than a bit of fear, a lot of fear now about actually going out in public. And I think in the short term, we're going to see some bargains, but I do expect that at some point it'll ratchet up, especially if there's consolidation and fewer carriers.
Well, that's a very good point about pricing, because I'm kind of in two minds. Are we going to see cheaper pricing because they're going to have to entice people back, or is there going to be limited supply of planes? And are those who want to travel going to have to pay a premium? What's your thoughts on it, Duncan? Have you given any consideration to where you think costs will go from here in terms of air travel?
Well, I think like with Barbara, really, I think we're going to see some consolidation, certainly, here in Australia with Qantas, and then we've got Virgin as the duopoly. Qantas is kind of bigger pockets and deeper profit lines over the time, but Virgin is really struggling. So they've already put their hands up for 1.5 billion recovery plan from the government. The budget area.
I think we're just losing you a little bit there with Duncan.
So we'll certainly see. Okay, try that. We'll try some consolidation. I think the reality will be that the fundamental thing is whether or not as an individual passenger you can travel. It doesn't really matter what the airlines will deem to happen. It will be whether or not you can actually leave the country. Currently, we can't leave or depart Australia. If we were to, we're not really encouraging people to come into Australia at this point in time. So if you look at that perspective, then it's most likely, in my opinion, that the business traveller will be the forerunners of the next travel movement. It'll be kind of a lower capacity, but that traveller will have to be certified in some shape, fashion, or form. So they're either that they've already been infected and they can prove that they are immune or are no longer carrying, or that by that stage we've got a vaccine. Now, the vaccine could be 18 months away. So it's a really unknown charter. I don't have a crystal ball. I would say it's going to be a slow recovery personally. I've even had a picture in my mind that a full recovery will take possibly up till 2023. But the first travellers will be business, followed then by, I believe, a smaller, more discerning traveller. And I think the prices will be quite high because the demand will be lower. There'll be a lot of capacity. A lot of forward contracts with Boeing and Airbus will have to be renegotiated. And the older type of aircraft companies will be moved across, and will go for the more economic, smaller carriers, smaller aircraft, like some of the other Airbuses, etc. So I think we're up for a major shape. Some of the major players and smaller players just won't survive.
It's interesting about business, because one thing that certainly happened with the lockdown is more businesses using features such as Zoom, like we're using today, to conduct business. And business is very much the backbone of many of these airlines' profitability. Are they going to come back again, these business travellers, or maybe we're going to see a situation where many of them will go, well, you know what, stuff this, we're just going to use Zoom. It's not worth the risk of having staff trapped, and it's probably not worth the cost. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens in that case. The other question, I guess, is who's going to be more affected? Is it going to be budget airlines or maybe the main carriers? And perhaps, Ian, I'll chuck this over to you, because being based in the UK, you see a lot of budget airlines through Europe, probably more so than the American market does. And they've certainly changed the way travel's been in the last few years. But do you think they're going to suffer in this environment more than the main carriers?
Oh, I really don't know. Here in the UK, we've got EasyJet, who were very quick to shut everything down. They've pretty much grounded all planes. So I think they've reacted quite quickly. And they've either laid off or furloughed a lot of staff. So I think those smaller airlines are perhaps able to react quicker and react better, and perhaps come back quicker and come back better when things do start to open up, because they seem to be able to sort of move more quickly than the big sort of lumbering giant companies. But And I think as well, as Barbara said, I think initially when travel comes back, they will have to offer some amazing deals to entice people to come back and to travel again. So my opinion is at the start there'll be some absolutely amazing deals, and those budget airlines are the ones that are already set up to do that and to offer those deals. So perhaps they're the ones who get the quick start when people can start moving again.
Okay, fair enough.
I also got an email from Norwegian, which of course is a big discount operator both in Europe and in the States. And they have already insisted, they want us all to know that they're ready and raring to go, and they're going to be back as soon as they can. So I don't think they're going anywhere.
We were due to fly on Norwegian 3 days from now. We were flying to New York for our next house sit. So Norwegian, they held on for quite a while before deciding to cancel flights. I think they were still hoping to keep going, and our return flight hasn't yet been cancelled. So although we can't get there, we still have.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, back from New York, and they haven't cancelled that, so we can't get it refunded
Strange.
yet. So they're hanging on. It's interesting what they're doing, because they got onto us very early and offered us what they call cash points. So they want to keep hold of the money, and they want to give us credits for the flights. And it's only when they actually cancel the flight that they have to give us the refund. So I think that they're keeping the flights open as long as possible and trying to encourage people to take credits rather than having to give cash back, which will, I guess, let them stay in business longer and keep their cash flow a bit healthier if they're not having to refund everyone for everything.
Well, and I took a voucher from Qatar Airlines, and I'm happy to do that because I know I'm going to fly again. But when it comes to the hotels, that's quite another thing. I had to cancel my whole Spain trip this summer, and I had a pretty good cooperation with everybody because the country had closed everything and we weren't allowed to come in, except for one place in Barcelona who insisted that I couldn't get my money back, but I had to reschedule. Well, how am I don't even know if I'm coming to Spain again. It's much less Barcelona and what dates it would be. So I'm in a dispute with my credit card company over it.
Fair enough. Well, that actually raises an issue for people who have trips booked this year and the legal standpoint with regards to the airlines. I think it will vary by country. My understanding in the US, Barbara, is that if they cancel the flight, you are entitled to a refund legally. Do you know much about that?
That's right. And I don't know. Yeah, I don't. Some of them may be asking their customers to take either a voucher or points or whatever. I know that the email I got from AirAsia, which is a European firm, but may apply to some of the US big carriers if they're asking people to take the vouchers in lieu of a refund to just try and help them stay in business. But the big deal in the US right now is the subsidies that they're going to be offered. Yes. And people are saying, the big companies that have made billions of dollars, and why should the government give them subsidies unless there are some controls? So it's such a mess right now. Who knows what's going to happen with that?
Yeah, a lot of the airlines are giving more credits. I just see a comment here from Tracy. She's due to fly to Italy and she's been offered a credit plus bonus money to rebook, which a lot of them are doing to try and avoid that. We're due to fly out tomorrow on Scoot, and I've tried to actually get a credit because they've offered a credit. Can't get their internet to work, can't get Facebook, can't get it. So in the end, I've just gone to the credit card company and asked for a refund. I'm trying to give them the opportunity to keep it, because I think, if you can, try and give them the chance to keep the money and reschedule, do so. But of course, that doesn't suit everybody at the end of the day. So I think in Australia, Duncan, we are entitled to a refund if they cancel. Do you know for sure? That's my understanding of it.
Well, obviously, no, the terms and conditions are fairly clear, which is that for example, Virgin will offer a voucher. Qantas has offered some rebates, and its sister company, Jetstar, has offered some. It really depends on what the booking conditions were at that time. There's no necessary horizontal government regulation in there. I think the real nub of the question is it doesn't really matter what the airlines perceive they want to be able to achieve. The bottom line is you may not be able to travel because the outbound country that you're currently domiciled in might not let you out, and the receiving company that you desire to travel to can prove that you're actually or you're not actually carrying. So that's the biggest challenge right now. It doesn't matter what we kind of desire. I really feel that, you know, we've got to be quite candid here, which is if you really believe that you're going to be traveling by air on a tourism, I'd like to be proven wrong, but I don't think there will be any international travel for tourism this calendar year. If it is, it will be under the very strict basis that you already can prove that you are not contagious, and that will require vaccinations, which is 18 months away. There is some viewpoint that already some of the folks that have been actually, like for example, 15% of the country here may already been infected. Because we don't have the testing in place, we don't know. And that's the problem, that's the challenge. And the challenge will be, how do those assets like airline companies keep going? And at some point, they're going to want to have to get going. Cargo will be key, commercial flights will be key, and the business travel is going to be. So that individual that can prove that they've been contaminated and are no longer contagious is a very valuable business traveller, I would say, going forward. So the tourism traveller, for example, I cannot tell you, I don't believe that Australia will allow a traveller coming in as a tourist for a considerable time. We don't even allow oranges in, you know, from agriculture. We will lock down pretty hard, I would say, as an example.
Wow.
Yeah, I think New Zealand will be the same. And
yeah, wow.
Joe saying that as well. So it is a bit of an issue. What I'm going to do now, guys, I've just got a little poll here. I haven't tried running one of these before, but just 2 or 3 questions of our audience, just to get a feel from when you guys are planning to go flying again. And if you want to fill that in, I'm just going to launch it now. I don't know what happens at your end, but I think you'll see something come up on your screen that will let you fill it in. If you don't want to, no problems at all. But it'd just be good to get a bit of feedback from you as to when you feel comfortable traveling and your attitude towards travel as a result of what's going on. So I'll get you guys to fill that in at your end, and we'll come back to the results of that later on before we finish this event. Probably something else to talk about is the accommodation line. I mean, we've seen the growth in the last few years of peer-to-peer examples of accommodation, such as Airbnb, and Booking.com have very much stepped into that space and probably eaten into the hotel chain revenue in that regard. But going forward, it'd be interesting to know what you guys think of the playing field that we'll have there. Is the hotels going to be coming out of this stronger, do you think, or are the peer-to-peer platforms in a better position from which to come from? Barbara, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, again, purely a guess, but you know, I've done it all. I've done locally owned guest houses to Airbnbs to you know, staying with local people to hotels in all price ranges. And my guess is that Airbnb and the peer-to-peer sharing is going to suffer a bit. I saw, I'm not sure what hotel chain it was, but one of the big ones in the US, Marriott or Hilton or somebody, they have bought robots that come into a room and they shine an ultraviolet light around everything that kills all the bacteria. And they were the first ones to do it. And I suspect that the big chains that have the resources to do something like that, and the ones that do it first and advertise it the most are going to be the biggest winners of market share. But I think that they're probably going to pick up some from the peer-to-peer. Because frankly, you know, if you've got an Airbnb, let's say, and you don't know who stayed there before, you don't know who stayed in the hotel room before either, but at least if the hotel is doing this, you have a little bit more comfort that it's clean and you have less chance of picking something up from it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Well, that's actually a very good point. And you're right, probably the hotels have the infrastructure to be able to invest in that sort of thing, which Airbnb may not. One thing I think might work against Airbnb, I've heard stories already, horror stories of super hosts that own 10 properties who are suddenly left exposed with their mortgages and going to be in serious trouble. So there'll be a lot of hosts who I think will struggle. But maybe one thing I am wondering which might work against the hotels is they have huge investments in properties that are sitting dormant at the moment with no return, which they will be leveraged. They'll have a lot of debt on those. Airbnb owners may be suffering, but Airbnb itself owns very little and could easily probably bounce back with new owners again. So that might work in their favour. What's your thoughts, Ian? Have you given any consideration to how you think that might play out?
Yeah, we're actually in an Airbnb place, and I know that there's 2 units here, and we've rented one long term. There were people in the one next door to us for a while, and when they left, the owner wanted to leave it for 3 days before she went in to clean. So there's that sort of whole cleaning thing Barbara mentions, that for both hotels and Airbnbs, they've got that. Another thing that sort of occurs to me as well is that I think accommodation that offers self-catering facilities is perhaps going to do better than hotels where you have a room at the hotel, but to eat you have to go to the restaurant or the dining room. And I think, you know, eating in restaurants is going to have to be very different for the next 12 months or so to have that distance and separation.
Yeah.
So, you know, for us, it's great. We've got this place and we've got our own little kitchen and everything, you know, we have here. There's only us been using it and touched it. But I'd be very hesitant to go to a restaurant in a hotel until there is a vaccine or until it's clear.
Ian, would you be afraid to go to the restaurant because of the physical distancing issue or because of worries about the food contamination?
Both, I think. I think that might occur to a lot of people. Both of those is the physical distancing. So, you know, the guidelines here in the UK, you have to be a minimum of 2 meters apart, which means, in actual terms of running a restaurant, I don't see how a restaurant can get back on its feet when they're going to have 25% capacity, and most restaurants need at least 50%. Capacity to eat.
But in terms of the food, they have said that there hasn't been a single case documented that's been an infection from foodborne.
I guess it's the surfaces though as well, isn't it? You know, the virus can live on metal surfaces. So you know, you have a table, you've got all the cutlery, all the serving implements. You know, if it's a buffet type meal, I don't think you'd want to go there at all, you know, sort of.
Guess we're going to all have to take our antiseptic wipes and wipe down the silverware.
Exactly, yeah. So there's just so many sort of little things that are all part of what I think people are going to think about and worry, you know. And like Airbnb, when it's just a shared bedroom in a house, but you're going into someone else's kitchen, I think both the owner is going to be reluctant having strangers come and stay and the people going to stay. And we thought, Vanessa said, there'll be a big resurgence in camping holidays where you take all of your own stuff, you go and set yourself up on a campsite and you're fully self-sufficient as a camper.
That's an interesting idea.
Camping will come back strong in the UK.
We've actually wondered that as well, particularly in Australia, where there is a lot of wide open spaces, which people will be very, very keen to explore. And, you know, there might be an increase in the price of caravans in the next little while, which might be the only thing going in price, I think. So, Duncan, what's your thought?
I think you're fine. Yeah, I mean, I think back to the point really. The Airbnb as an example, or that type of accommodation. Take Airbnb for example. I think there's a developing that to become a continuous super host. I think you'll find they will give very clear guidance as to how to create a very clean environment, and that will go back to having super cleaning going on in there. I'm certainly way more comfortable currently in going into something like that rather than going to a large hotel where, you know, I've got people touching the lifts. I've got, you know, the check-in process where people are touching, going into a room where I kind of don't know whether or not it's done clean properly. So until we've kind of got to a stable place where we're comfortable as individuals and as collectives, then I think that model would prevail. We also have seen that, for here an example in Australia, is that the tiny houses are actually becoming more as an interesting option where you can actually go and rent that accommodation on a daily basis. And it's a little home that's kind of been created out of some form of small container type style home or whatever on a farm property, which gives you an amazing opportunity to have these wonderful holidays. So I think that kind of style where you're catering for yourself, you're going in, you're monitoring your own transportation up to that area, you're getting a local, you may be going to the local areas to enjoy the local facilities, but you're kind of a little bit more in your control until we get to a state globally where this virus has been deemed to be in what they might say under control. Once we get into an under control status, then I think the movement will become more encouraging and more capable.
Yeah. There'll definitely be winners and losers, and maybe some who we haven't even perceived yet. There'll be opportunities that people will take advantage of as others are suffering. So it's very true. Actually, Duncan, I'd like you to just come through there, and it might be a good one. Maybe just turn your camera off because your sound is getting a little bit glitchy coming through. Of course, we won't see your handsome face, but hey, we're prepared to live with that in order to hear the wisdom of your words. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, it might just help with things. While you're doing that, I'm just going to run through the results of the poll. We've had a response from 92% of people, which is excellent. And I'll just run you through the questions and the results. The first question, do you intend to travel in the next 12 months after travel restrictions are lifted? An overwhelming yes of 90% on that. So most people are more than happy to travel again, despite what's been going on. So that's very encouraging to see. Second question, how would you describe your attitude to travel as a result of the epidemic? 13% says it doesn't bother them at all. 87% will travel again, but will change the way I do it. And nobody has said not going anywhere, thanks. So this hasn't put off any of the people on the webinar tonight from actually traveling, and that's good to see as well. But those of you who did put will travel again, but change the way I do it, feel free to put into the feed your definition of what doing it again would be. It is flying through quite fast. I'm sorry I can't keep referring to some of the comments that are coming through, but if you do want to chuck it up there, I might just share some of that with the audience as well. And the third question, which of the following travel means would you be comfortable with taking? And you can choose more than one here. 82% are still more than happy with doing air travel. Only 8% are saying they're comfortable with cruise ships. 79% happy with land travel, 85% traveling domestically, 77% still happy to travel internationally. So very encouraging. I don't think too many people from the audience here anyway have been put off too much by the events that have happened. But the cruise ship one is interesting. Obviously it depends on how many of you are cruisers in the first place. But that probably leads us nicely into that question and where the cruise ship industry will head from here. I've heard it described recently as cruise ships are something of a floating petri dish. Probably a little bit harsh, but some truth to that in some ways. And I guess the big question is, how will the cruise industry bounce back? Barbara, you're something of an expert in this area, given your involvement with Viking Cruises. What's your thoughts on how cruising will go? And in particular, probably with that river cruising versus open sea cruising, I think there will be a difference maybe there. So
I do. I put the river cruising sort of in the same category as small ship cruising. The specialty cruises like you know, the combination freight and cruise ship passenger, like I took in French Polynesia, or the Audubon Society that does, you know, the inside passage of Alaska, and they all have much smaller capacity. The average, and I can only speak to Viking because I've worked with them quite a bit, and they have an average of no more than 200 people on a ship. Right. And so it's a much more doable situation. I just recently finished a cruise. Oh, and my God, I'm going to go completely. Oh, Antarctica. I zoned out there for a bit. You know, just a senior moment. We had 178 people on the ship, and when we went in for meals, we had to go to an orientation first. Because of course, Antarctica, there's all kinds of rules what you can and cannot do to protect the environment. And part of that was our on board rules and regulations. And we had to stand in line to get into the restaurant. And they told us that washing hands is much better than using the sanitary gel. And so one by one, we filed through and we washed our hands at a sink with soap and water before we were let into the restaurant. And they had staff standing at the doorway to make sure that everybody did it. So I think that the ships that have, you know, if you got 4,000 or 5,000 people on a ship, how can you make that happen? It's impossible. But if you have smaller ships that have more, the ratio of crew to the passengers is high, like there's, you know, most of the river cruises and small ship cruises I've done have had one employee for every 2 guests. I think that there's a level of personalized service and oversight that can happen that people will still be comfortable with.
Yeah.
But in terms of the big ships, I think they are really done. I think they're in big trouble.
Okay, well, that's interesting to know. And I think the other interesting thing with river cruises is you're going to be a heck of a lot closer to land, which for people will give them peace of mind, because
yeah, right.
ports, 1,000 kilometers offshore or 1,000 miles offshore, and an outbreak happens, and there's nowhere for you to go but to be caught with everyone else in the situation. A river cruise is perhaps going to give some protection. But Duncan, if you're still with us, I'll get your thoughts on this. But before I cross to you, I just want to share some interesting information I read yesterday. Year on year, there is actually a 9% increase in bookings for the month for 2021 for cruises. But one thing that may be affecting that is possibly credits being carried forward for people, which again, many of the cruise ships are keen to do. But on the face of that information, and it may, I don't know the source of it, it may be being distorted maybe by cruise ship companies trying to put a positive spin. But on the face of it, that would kind of give an indication that cruise ships feel as though they can still come out of this okay. But again, whether that raw data tells the whole story, I don't know. But Duncan, you've done a lot of cruising, including to Antarctica as well. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I'm personally with, I think Jane and I will be personally with Barbara on this, which is that the smaller ships would be the way that we would continue considering traveling. We talked about that ourselves in terms of reviewing our bucket list, and certainly, we had hoped to get to Egypt, and certainly that would be a smaller. We want to do the northern lights areas, so that would be once again a smaller. We had planned, in fact, to be doing some work with some guys in fact, through the waterways and through France. And Antarctica was very much the same experience that Barbara had, which was, it was a beautiful experience, almost 1-to-1 or 1-to-2-to-1 ratios. I think, I wrote down some positive notes about what was happening currently, and I think that we were really seeing the tourism created by the very, very large cruise ships. And, Virgin just launched one recently with over 5,000 passengers on there. We've seen the damage that the big, large cruisers can do for them. So it's a model really which was possibly doomed for failure, and maybe this has just brought it forward. And the over-commoditization of that local experiences through cruises, I think, is definitely the way that we'll see it going. I think also that the regulations by governments and ports just won't want to have that risk going forward of that petri dish potentially coming into your area. I know for a fact, I can't imagine large cruisers coming into Australia for considerable time. So big benefits. I think it's much smaller cruises going forward, much more authenticated travel will be the way to go using the cruises. And I think it'll be a really good model for the future.
I think that raises an interesting point about the size of trips in general. It may not just be cruises, but I'll throw this over to you, Ian. I don't know whether you're a cruiser or not, but the whole concept of maybe people preferring to travel in smaller groups. Are we going to see the same situation with maybe the big 40-seater buses? People are going to want to travel in smaller groups on land as well? Do you think that will have an impact?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's sort of possibly the only way forward. The big cruise ships. We've never been on a cruise ship. I've sort of fancied it. Vanessa's not really keen on the idea at all. I wonder though, just from listening to Barbara and Duncan there, about the price implications of those smaller cruises where you have that one staff to two people. That's got to make it a much more expensive proposition. So it's going to remove a lot of people, a lot of potential customers from the market, and make it a high-end product for a high-end consumer. Of which I suspect there's going to be less when we come out of this, because there's going to be financial implications for everyone. But yeah, bus travel and any sort of travel, how is the underground system going to work in London? How are buses going to operate, or trains? When you can't pack people in like sardines, I don't really see how we get back to any kind of normal until there is a vaccine. But for any of that.
Well, there are some if I may interject here, there are some things going on that may serve as interim solutions. I know that there's something coming out of Germany, I can't remember exactly what it is, where it will suppress the virus for a short period of time until we get to the vaccine. But also now they're talking about, I live in Thailand, and they now have a test here where you can go in and get a pinprick of blood, and it will give you the results as to whether or not you have it in 15 minutes. I talked to doctor friends of mine just last week in the US, and they said that that is also starting, it's going to be coming online in the US very shortly. And then if we get a test that will allow us to see who has the antibodies, so who has had it and might not even know they had it, but they're immune to it because they have the antibodies. I mean, it's a question of testing, as they say. And if we can ramp that up, I think that that's going to be, you know, that might make the whole situation look a lot different.
Yeah, I think so. And a lot of it's going to come back to people's perceptions too. It's whether you feel you're vulnerable or not, and that may dictate it. I mean, if you're not feeling vulnerable, then you're not going to want to spend a lot extra on a 2-to-1, you know, cruise service if that's not in your budget and you're feeling confident about it, I guess. Whereas if it is a concern, it may drive more people to that end of the market. So very valid points. We've had a couple of raised hands in the Q&A. If you just pop your things in the chat box, guys, because it'll be easier for me to find you in the chat box area if you've got any questions. We have had a question here from some of our viewers, Susan and John. We're just asking about insurance and the impact that this may have on insurance and how easy it will be to get it. I'm not an insurance expert, so I'll throw it open to whichever you guys want to jump in. But what impact do you think this is going to have on insurance? Are insurance companies going to want to deal with this? What's going to happen to premiums as a result?
Well, I mean, I think that's a fundamental question, which is at the end of the day is, you know, we've always said to people, if you can't afford travel insurance, you shouldn't travel. And we've always taken that line when we've been discussing people. And I think the fundamental issue is, you know, which company is going to be brave enough to insure in this situation. Now, well, they did have a pandemic clause in there. So in fact, prior to, I think it was mid-February, if you had already booked with them and you were affected by corona and you were impacted, you were covered. So that was really good news. But now, if you go to their site, that is now not available. And certainly they were one of the few companies globally that actually had already allowed for pandemic. Travel companies don't have that in there. Many folks use travel insurance as associated with their credit cards. You know, many of those don't cover pandemics. So it's going to be a really, I mean, for us personally, we're kind of at the age whereby we're probably most impacted at the age area, and therefore, you know, we may not be able to get travel insurance. If we can't get travel insurance, we won't be traveling. Not until there's a test like Barbara intimated that we've already been impacted, and therefore we're self-immune. Good stuff. But if we test and find out that we're not, and can't be covered, that's definitely a circuit breaker for us in terms of doing international travel for the foreseeable future until those circumstances kind of prevail through. So I think it's a massive issue.
And you're right, credit card insurance will be a very interesting one. And just another question come through from Tracy regarding that, as to whether annual travel insurance will still be a case. I guess my thoughts are if insurance companies think they can make money, they'll keep offering a product. How that pricing will be interesting. But have you got any thoughts on that, Ian?
Yeah, I think as you say, you know, if an insurance company can make money, they will do. If an insurance company can wriggle out of paying for something, that they'll also do that. You know, their model is driven by finances. So I think going forward, you'd have to be very careful about the policy you take and what it covers. And you know, if COVID-19 isn't covered by the policy, then it's an extra gamble you're taking, particularly if you go somewhere that has expensive health facilities. Then it's something, as Duncan says, I think for us, until all that gets resolved, I don't know that we'd be too comfortable traveling abroad to somewhere like the States, where becoming ill is going to be is going to break you financially.
Fair enough. Barbara, have you got any thoughts on what you think might happen in that area?
Yeah, you're going to probably have a lot of backlash on this one because I think probably Duncan and Jane are going to tell me I'm irresponsible. I've been traveling for 13.
Just lost Barbara temporarily. Are you still there, Barbara? I might have to come back to Barbara in a minute. So
More difficult. Sorry?
we just lost you briefly, then, Barbara. I'll just get you to start that again.
Okay, I don't know how much you heard, but I'm getting older, so not only is it more expensive to buy travel insurance, but it's harder to find a policy that will cover me at this age. The way I approach it these days is, as I said, I live in Thailand. We have really good healthcare here, and it's quite inexpensive. And I feel that I can self-insure here. I can afford to pay for whatever I need. So I sort of make a determination about where I'm going. And if I'm going to a first world country that has decent health care, I don't really worry about it. I'll pay for what I need to pay for if I get sick. If I'm going to a third world country or developing country, for instance, I go to Nepal once every 12 to 18 months, and I've literally toured the hospitals there and have been scared you-know-what-less. And I don't go to Nepal now unless I have an insurance policy. What I opt to do in those cases is I buy, I think they call it an evacuation policy. I use a company called MedJet Assist, and I buy the policy for the period of time that I'm going to be traveling. What that allows me to do is, if I'm sick, they will come and evacuate me with a plane that it's a medical plane, so equipped with all the medical equipment and personnel needed, and I get to choose where I'm moved to. So I could tell them Bangkok Hospital, or I could tell them someplace in the States. It's up to me. And it also covers repatriation of remains. So, you know, I kind of feel like that's all I need. I suppose, I don't know, I'm not a fatalist, but I'm going to die sometime. And I suppose that sounds very irresponsible.
Okay, sorry, just repeat the name of that again for everyone. Barbara, what was it called?
It's called MedJet, MEDJET Assist. And they don't sell insurance policies, but they sell evacuation policies.
Okay.
So yeah, if you get sick, what happens is their medical personnel get in touch with the personnel at the hospital where you've been taken, and they decide, you know, what is wrong with you. Their doctors have the right to intercede on your behalf and determine what it would be best to do for you. And then they come in, they evacuate you and take you to the country and the hospital that you want to be taken to.
Wow, I see SG's just commented here on the field, MedJet Assist is great, so obviously they've used it. Friends just asked the question, Barbara, how expensive is it? Is it very pricey?
No, it's not very. I just bought a policy when I went to Antarctica because in that case, I had to. It was part of the obligation to take the cruise. And gosh, I don't know. I think that one I did through Allianz, and that was not too expensive, $360 or something. But you can get a short term, or you can buy a 6-month policy or an annual policy, which is renewable, and it's just not very much. I mean, it's maybe $500-600 for the year. The last time I did it.
Okay, oh, obviously well worthwhile. Good to know about that. Just another question we had come through from Brent. He's just wondering how this current situation has affected the income for bloggers. How are you guys getting on in terms of dealing with that? Because I know there's been a lot of talk about eyeballs dropping with people not really thinking about travel quite so much, but without obviously getting into the nitty-gritty of your numbers, has it had an impact?
It certainly has for us. We publish House Sitting magazine, and our income just dropped off a cliff edge. But for us, we're in a fortunate position. We had a fallback plan B, and we used to, our first online income was teaching English we worked for a Chinese company. And we've been able to go back to that company and go back to teaching English and start again tomorrow. So we're very fortunate that we've been quickly able to replace the income that we lost. But yeah, ours just disappeared within the space of a week or so. It just dropped. Fell to practically zero.
Yeah. Okay. What about you guys, Duncan? Have you noticed any difference in eyeballs, at least in terms of your blog?
Pretty much, rolled off the cliff, and certainly any revenue that was prevailing. We had some forward load order book as well, which has disappeared completely. We've had a number of, we work with a lot of brands as well, so we had some forward contracts associated with that, with work experiences, and clearly those aren't going to happen in the immediate term, and if not the mid to long term. So, you know, we started plan A. Plan A was that we were leaving Australia at the beginning of, at the end of March, and we were heading towards Europe. And then we'd be in Sicily. That soon became plan B. And that plan B was to go to Egypt and work our way to Jordan and Israel up to Europe. It then became plan C. And now we're at FF, not plan G. So we've actually moved our entire business plan and our, you know, kind of planned movement to May 20 next year, 2021. We literally moved a year, because that's kind of going to be the time period to getting back to some sense of normality. And that goes alongside revenue. So we'll be working with brands. We think what we'll be doing is we'll be working much more locally, to be honest with you. We'll be working with New South Wales Tourism. We'll be working then with, you know, maybe the Queensland brands, and then venturing out as Australia unlocks its borders. And once that happens, we'll spend the next year traveling and enjoying our own country. That's the plan.
And I think a lot of people will be doing that, and it might be that the tourism, which has suffered a lot in many places, I'm here on the Gold Coast of Australia, which has been devastated to say the least, it may well pick up a lot of local tourism in a way which helps in some way to compensate for what might happen. So we're like you guys, we're having to push everything forward. Thankfully this year we didn't plan things out as much as we did last year, where we had everything booked and worked out in advance. We've learnt from many of you other travel bloggers, we don't need to be quite that organised. And this year, fortunately, we hadn't pre-booked a lot, so not a lot to cancel. But one thing we did have was a few house sits sorted out, and which probably leads us nicely into that particular topic, because that's one area that I think will be interesting to see. Obviously, with house sitting, Ian, it's two sides of a fence. Those who go away on holiday who need the house sitter, and those who want the lifestyle of house sitting coming into the property. So it's very much a win-win. Probably a win-win-win if you count how the pets feel about it all as well. But how do you see that playing out? Are we going to see people having less demand for house sits and maybe less house sitters floating around?
I think so. Yeah, that's my, as everything, that's my opinion. I think it will be a slow restart for house sitting. Because as Duncan says, I think people are going to want to travel much more locally, or a lot of people will want to travel much more locally for a while. So that offers up the option of being able to travel yourself as a house sitter more locally. But the small problem with that is that if you go on holiday within your own country, for people who own dogs, it's quite possible that you're going to go somewhere that's pet friendly, so you can take your dog with you, which then means there's no need of a house sitter back at the house. You know, that almost all house sits are about pets. So if people can take their pet with them, or to, you know, to a campground or on a local holiday, there's possibly not going to be even the local sits for quite some time. So I think it's going to be very slow to open back up again and offer the opportunities that it did just 3 months ago. I think it's going to be a very different world for quite a time going forward in terms of house sitting.
We've noticed here in Australia what few sits have popped up lately have been inundated by the house sitters that are out there. So it's very much a case of more demand and supply at present. So yes, it will be interesting to see what happens. But Duncan, I know you guys have done quite a bit of house sitting in the past. What's your thoughts on how you think that might pan out?
I think back to Ian's point, I think that it's literally stalled, I would suspect, because you've got you've got folks that are trying to have to repatriate back to their home base. And so you've had a house sitter that might have been there. They might have been planning to run a holiday, or even, so say, for example, some of the Canadians that might be doing snowbirds that have gone down to Central or South America. But for health reasons may have made that decision, which is to repatriate back to Canada as an example, which then means that that house sitter then has to move out, and then the opportunity of trying to find someone. So there's a lot of, I know that the ENS are an outstanding job, frankly, in their house setting magazine group. I think probably one of the best groups that have really put their arms around this community, because there's a lot of folks that are completely disenfranchised being in this situation, with literally homeless in many senses on many sides. So they put their arms around it. They've got an amazing support group to find accommodation for folks that have been disenfranchised from that environment. It will require the ability to move. And that will come down to the virus getting to a stage where it's becoming much more in a controllable situation. And once it's in a controllable situation, and then as Barbara's alluded to the fact more discerning testing going on, then that's kind of make it easier. So I mean, for example, if you're a house sitter and you've been tested and you found that you're actually being contaminated, but now you've built up immune system, man, you're a worthy house sitter. You know, you've got the ability to be able to print your ticket for free movement. So I think we're going to see some fascinating credentials. And I can remember years back, you know, traveling down into Central South America with our little yellow book, which was our yellow fever. We weren't allowed to get into some countries if we didn't have that book. It's going to be that, albeit I don't think it'll be a book anymore. I think hopefully it's not a microchip or something like that, but it'll be certainly a global registered understanding that you're compliant to.
It's a very good point, Duncan. I might go for a wander out tonight after this and see if I can catch myself a disease somewhere. It might be just what I need to start getting house sitting jobs again.
You know, the other thing that we haven't really talked about is this is talked about, this COVID-19 as being once in 100 years, but with the environment the way it is, and the ice cap, the polar caps melting, and the ice in Siberia melting, and the emergence of diseases that have been long thought to be gone coming back out again, we might not be seeing this once every 100 years. We might be seeing it once every 10 years.
We might be seeing it every year.
Absolutely.
The point's been raised. What happens next December in the Northern Hemisphere when that breaks again? Are we going to go into
right? Well, the Spanish flu took between 2 and 3 years to go away.
It could well be the case. And that actually leads into a question here I got from Fran. Do you think the model for best deals on flights of booking maybe 6 to 7 weeks out from departure will change post-COVID? And I think that leads into another question we're going to talk about, is how comfortable are people going to be booking trips well in advance? I don't know quite how it works in the Northern Hemisphere. In the Southern Hemisphere, most people book in sort of September, October, November with a travel agent to take that July, August Northern Hemisphere summer holiday. That's probably been the norm, maybe slightly different time frame for you guys, but whether people are going to feel that confident about, you know, pre-booking cruises, tours, etc., 6 to 8 months in advance, how do you guys feel the impact will be from that? Is that something that you think will restrict that part of the market? Certainly shorten the time frame?
I wouldn't be booking 6, or I personally won't be booking 6. I won't be booking ahead. I mean, no way. I think we will, on the assumption that there is a travel ability to be able to exit, for example, the first thing will be with the Australian government says, yes, you can travel out and you're non-business and you are a tourist traveller and you can travel to these countries, as it were. Then I think Jane and I would look to our agenda and then book kind of the best flight that we probably could at that time. I think pre-booking now on the basis that you're getting a good deal, I think you'll end up with a voucher, and whether the voucher is associated with a company that's going to exist. For example, you know, I've no idea what's going to happen with frequent flyer points. If you've got a frequent flyer point with a company that's a go under, what happens to them? Yeah. So I would be probably counselling people not to be thinking of making a surprising investment of massive savings. I think, you know, be much more discerning about where you're going to be spending your money and where you're going to be going to. And that also changes the whole shape, I think, of where travel's going to be. I think travel will go to much more discerning. I think we will, you know, we won't be rushing into places so much. I think that will cost more to travel. Therefore, we will be more, we will look at places in a different perspective. We'll look at them from their cultural perspective. We'll look at them from their heritage perspective. It takes time to really embrace the countries that we're going into, not rushing around like we have done in the past, you know, catching that Instagram moment. I think the major benefit of this virus is, and for our travel plans, do some really good travel planning. So when it does open up, do longer travel journeys if you can afford to, and look at your bucket list and be very discerning about it. And it might be a very high value bucket rather than a commoditized one, which is where I think we were kind of ending up going towards with the large cruise companies, you know, the commoditized travel portfolios that were going on. I think that will be the shape of fashion in the future.
Mm. A very good point. I think, yeah, at a time like this, people do reflect on their lives a lot more and probably are thinking about their bucket lists and doing things that are more meaningful, maybe a bit less materialistic. And I think also at moments like this, people are really going to be itching to get out again too, having been hemmed in their house for a long period of time. But I think what will be interesting is probably a little bit different for all of us because we can tend to plan our travel at short notice. This is what we do for a living and our way of life. But for those people who may have to book their summer holiday 6 months in advance with their bosses and then go about the process of booking it, do you think it's going to make them feel a lot more hesitant about getting out there and pre-booking a holiday for their once-in-a-lifetime journey, Barbara, or do you think they're going to feel confident about doing that?
Well, I don't know that I'm the best person to answer this because my mode of travel has always been buy a one-way ticket to a continent and then spend 4 to 6 months traveling around. And a lot of times, like if I'm in Europe, I just go to the train station one day when I'm sort of done with a place and look at the board and see what looks interesting and hop on the next train to there. I rarely book a flight more than a week ahead of time. I know that in my previous life, before I became a travel writer, I worked in real estate on the Outer Banks of North Carolina, which is a vacation rental market. And I was there for 10 years. And from the time I started to the time I left, which was in, I think, late December 2006, the average length of time that someone would book ahead went from 6 months to something like 3 weeks. So, and to some degree, the companies were their own worst enemy because like the department stores, they discounted, and people became trained to wait until the last minute because they knew that they could get the best prices. So I just don't think that it's going to make too much difference in terms of the people who travel like me. We're still going to do the same thing. Also in the US, you know, the tendency is not to use travel agents anymore. Most people are doing their own booking now. Those that are still using travel agents, they still do, they say that 85 to 90% of all travel searching starts on the internet, and then you may go to a travel agent and use that travel agent to book, but you go and tell them, this is what I want, this is where I want to go, you know, and they do the final portion for you. I just don't see that anybody's going to book 3 to 6 months ahead of time. I'm with Duncan. I think that nobody, given what we've gone through, you know, with having to cancel all of our trips this year, I don't think anybody's going to take that chance.
Okay, fair enough too. Well, it's probably a little different in the Southern Hemisphere. Australia and New Zealand, there's still a lot of travel agents being used for bookings, and they traditionally do book in advance. But I think you're right. I would be very hesitant if I was in that situation. You'd want some very ironclad guarantees as to what would happen if that didn't go ahead. So I've actually a question just come through here from Kathy Wong. Do you think this will open up more social impact travel? I'm assuming Kathy means from that environmentally friendly travel, thinking about carbon offset, that sort of thing. Do you guys think there's going to be more of an increase in that as a result of what's been happening?
What does she mean by social impact?
I'm assuming she's meaning in the environment, but perhaps Kathy, just maybe clarify that. I'm taking that as people being more environmentally conscious, perhaps, in their travel plans.
Yeah, I think we might take that one. We know Kathy, and so I'll just answer for her. And hopefully I've got it right, Kathy. But I think there's two sides. What I think she's really intimated to the fact that we've discussed it actually with her is that it's really about us having the social impact. So the travel will be one of the things we talked to her about is that the over tourism was occurring. For example, we came back from Vietnam recently and went to Halong Bay, and it was UNESCO World Over and that's not unique. You know, there are other sites around the world which have been over tourism going on. So
Duncan,
a sustainable model,
I'll just get you
a
to cut
social
your
model.
camera again. Is that be all right? If you could just cut your camera again, you're breaking up as you're going through there. It might work a little bit better. Kathy's just clarified her question. She means environment, but also wanting to help communities less fortunate rebuild. So, okay, so contributing to the communities that you go to. So that might be something actually you could talk to, Barbara. I think we just lost Duncan there briefly, but I know you've done a lot of community type work in Nepal. So maybe that's something you can shed a bit more light on.
Yeah, I have a suspicion that we are all going to want more meaningful travel. I'll repeat something that Duncan said because I've said it before. I hope, I pray that this situation is going to end the throngs of tourists crowding into a UNESCO World Heritage Site and trying to get that one iconic Instagram photo. I am so sick of it. I cannot stand the crowds anymore. I can't stand the people barreling through without regard for anybody but themselves. They're just massive tour groups right now. It's kind of ruined travel for me to some degree. So my hope is that people are going to come out of this having thought about what's most meaningful in their lives. And I think that the willy-nilly travel just to catch the perfect wedding shot in a lavender field and that sort of thing, we may see less of that. And I have always tried to connect, that's why my site is called Hole in the Donut Cultural Travel. I thought that the world would be a better place if we all stopped fearing one another. And, I believe we're one human family, regardless of what religion we practice and food we eat and language we speak. And so I have always tried to connect with people on a more cultural, local level so that I can write stories about those places from that viewpoint and let people see that travel is not dangerous and that, we're all pretty much alike. We're more similar than we are different. And I think that there is going to be an uptick in that. I think people are going to want a much more meaningful experience. And I suspect we're going to see people, the 17 countries in 30 days, I suspect that's going to suffer a hit. I think that we're going to see people wanting to go to one region and sort of immerse in that region and get to know the local people and eat the local food. I hope anyway.
Yeah, what's your thoughts here?
I think that's where house sitting can fit in. That's what house sitters do is go to one place, and generally, certainly long-time or full-time house sitters tend to pick one area and go and live there almost, in the shoes of the locals who live there. So you do get that more immersed local experience over a longer period of time, and you're not rushing around, like Barbara says, with your selfie stick to get that Instagram moment. You're just more living the life.
Yes, I was just going to say the same thing, and the comment here from Cheryl said exactly the same thing. She was typing it as you said it. And Barbara, a lot of people agreeing with you on that too. And that probably leads me on to the next question really, which is who's going to be the winners and losers of this in terms of travel destinations? And my thoughts are the Venices of this world, the Dubrovniks, the Pisas, the places that have been inundated and turned into little more than tourist hotspots may well be the losers, and some other places that are more authentic could be the winners. Have you guys given any thought to where you think might be the places that might prove more popular and what may start to lose some tourism traffic as a result?
I think that probably South America is an emerging destination. And I think that that's because it's not over-touristed. It has never been high on people's radar. And it's easier to have a cultural experience. Although I have to say that I speak pretty fluent Spanish, and I just came back from South America recently. And it would have been much more difficult for me had I not spoken Spanish, because so many of the places did not speak much English at all. So it's going to take a little bit of, although we do have tools now, we have Google Translate and that sort of thing. But because of that, because Western, I don't want to say Western because that's South America is in the West, but I'll take Italy for an example. In all of Europe, I think that Italy has probably retained their culture more so than most countries. I mean, if you go to most other countries, you hear a smattering of English words when people talk. You don't hear that in Italy. The food in Italy, you don't see a lot of the international chains in Italy, unless you're sort of in Rome. But, you know, their pizza, pasta, risotto, and seafood, those are the basics in Italy. And they do that on purpose because they want to retain their culture. And I think that, I'm rambling a little bit here, but I think that places like that, where they really have retained their culture, are probably gonna benefit from this.
Yeah. Well, you say, you know, not speaking English, but then in some regards, that's what you're looking for, because otherwise it feels like being back home again. So
Exactly.
not such a bad thing at the end of the day. Ian, what's your thoughts on that in terms of places you think may become more popular or less popular?
I think perhaps people are going to have more of an appreciation of the outdoor type of travel people can do, you know, so more remote places where perhaps you can get out into the mountains or on lakes or something like that, where you're not crammed in to a big city centre and you're not going to the square in the middle of Venice or something like that, where you can be out in nature and be in a hopefully much less sort of crowded atmosphere as well. So that's something we've always enjoyed. But I think, you know, as people are cooped up for a long time, then the urge to get out perhaps isn't to another big city, but to somewhere a bit more open and a bit more natural.
Mm. Yeah. And another...
Tony, could I ask Ian a question?
Sure.
Ian, as you know, I've never done house sitting. And I say sort of tongue in cheek, I don't even want the responsibility of my house, much less somebody else's.
Yeah.
But frankly, one of the reasons I haven't done it is because I'm a single woman, 68 years old. I'm not particularly handy. I like cats. Dogs I'm less crazy about. But I have always felt like there wasn't much of a market for someone like myself, that most people who are looking for house sitters want a couple. They want a man that can fix things. I mean, can you talk about that?
No, you were sort of the perfect profile for a house sitter. There's so many people like you who are single ladies house sitting. A lot of the times it's not like the house is in a state of disrepair and they need a DIY handyman. It's basically just putting food in the cat's bowl or taking the dog for a walk and just living, you know, it's to keep the routines of the animal the same as they've always been with their owners. So most house sits, there's nothing more than looking after the pets really involved. And there are so many house sitters just like you. You'd be perfect for it.
Interesting. I'm gonna have to look into that.
Barbara,
Yeah,
I can't hit a nail straight. You know that, and I can get house sits. So honestly, I mean, I do dread the day that something major happens and they'll look at me as if I'm going to be able to solve it. But generally, you know, most things aren't that bad. And I've seen a lot of house sits where they do ask for a single woman. It's not uncommon.
Really?
But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and as Vanessa says there, I think Vanessa's typing some things, you know, it's a really sort of safe way as well for people to travel, and you end up, you know, in a home, in a nice area with neighbours. You know, usually people will introduce you to the neighbours as they depart. So, you know, it's a very sort of nice, easy, settled way of travelling, and a good sort of into the local culture as well.
It's very enjoyable, Barbara. You better try it at least once in your life. I can highly recommend it. Actually, there's a question just here from Brent, probably aimed towards you, Ian. What would be your advice for someone, if someone new wants to get into house sitting, things to prepare for when travelling globally does return? So a first timer, what would your suggestions be for them to get ready?
I guess it's starting to sort of pull together all that information that will really support your profile as a house sitter. You know, what skills do you have? Have you owned your own property? Have you rented other properties, so that you can pull together the references from previous places you lived, or perhaps employer references. And also, what we always suggest to people is try locally. You know, offer out to friends and family and people from from work and the gym. If you're going for a weekend away, I'll come and look after your cat for the weekend. And you get those little sort of, it allows you to try it for yourself. it gets you a genuine reference for having done a genuine house sit for someone. And it's those references really the key thing. Once you start getting references for house sits you've done, that's what people look to decide, are they going to be a good fit for us? So just start building a bit of experience and a few references, and gather some pictures of you with pets. You know, if you've got a dog, get some pictures, or if you've got a neighbour with a dog, take the dog for a walk and get some pictures, because you being comfortable around animals is one of the key things for doing house sits.
Very good point. And a couple of people have said there, Barbara, that you'll probably find you'll love dogs once you get started. And I know
I saw that.
Yeah, I never used to be a dog person.
Sorry, Ian.
Yeah, I never really was much of a dog person. I've had many cats as pets, but never much of a dog person. But I've just come to appreciate them so much through house sitting. They're all unique characters with their own little habits, and they're just such fun to be around. Really completely changed my outlook on dogs. I think that they're such fun. And at the moment, where we're renting, the owner has 2 dogs, and I keep thinking, oh, it's great to take them out for a walk or something, just to help out, because I find myself now missing not having dogs around.
Yeah, well, we're the same. We've always been cat owners our whole lives, never had a dog. And I find if I house sit now and there's a cat, I'm bored. I want a dog to go for a walk. You know, it does. It gets you out of the house, and they're so interactive with you. And I actually miss a house sit when you don't have that dog to care for. So it is a unique experience. So yes, Barbara, even you could become a dog lover.
Well, and you know, there's another argument for this. I've been reading about France, you know, where the people can't go out at all unless they want to walk the dog. And so the dogs are not getting walked 10 times a day because they're sharing them among the neighbors who don't have dogs so they can get out.
It's a good excuse, isn't it?
Yeah.
The dogs will be worn out.
Very good. If there's no further questions from our audience, just jump in quickly, guys. But if there's nothing else to cover here, I think we'll probably wind this up. Unfortunately, we did lose Duncan. He did say at the start he was probably going to have some internet connections, and we have lost him, unfortunately. But a special thanks to Duncan and Jane Dempster-Smith for joining us. Of course, their travel blog is To Travel To. I urge you guys, particularly in Australia and New Zealand, to check it out. There's some wonderful resources on there for you to learn about travel and to share their experiences. They've been on some wonderful trips. And of course, thank you to the 2 remaining guests who managed to keep up a decent internet connection. Ian, Usher, actually, Ian, there was some very nice comments coming through commending Trusted House Sitters, House Sitting Magazine for the resources that you do have from 1 or 2 fans. So obviously, a lot of people enjoy your resources as we do. So for those who are looking to get into house sitting, check out Ian and Vanessa's site, House Sitting Magazine. The magazine is free, of course, isn't it, Ian? And the resources are all there for anyone to access. So go to the website, sign up, and you'll discover a new world of travel you never knew about before. And of course, a special thanks also to Barbara Weibel of holeandthedonut.com. I've got it right this time, straight off the top of the head, Barbara, no messing around. Barbara is an extremely, her story is amazing. We've interviewed Barbara on several occasions. We've had the pleasure and privilege of traveling with her on 3 or 4 occasions as well, which has been amazing.
And I with you.
Oh, you're very kind. And she has a host of information. Her specialty is culture. So if you're really wanting to learn about those hidden parts of the world that you may never have dreamed of going to, as she said, 100 countries she's been to now. So check out holeandthedonut.com to learn more about their resources. Thank you to the audience for coming along tonight. We really appreciate you being here. We'll, of course, have a copy of this we'll put up on the website and we'll share with those who couldn't make it, which I know a few of our American listeners couldn't. And next week, we'll be repeating this with a fresh panel at a more friendly time for our North American viewers. So hopefully we'll email you during the week and let you know about that if you wish to rejoin. So thank you, guys. We'll say goodbye to everybody. Hooray to our panelists.
Thanks very much for inviting me.
Yeah.
No problem. Thank you very much, guys. And we'll catch you all again later.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.